Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
I'm a wildlife researcher in Slovakia. I've never seen animals like this before. A horror story from Reddit. r/NoSleep. On the very first day we arrived, she saw them. She warned me, and I told her she was only tired from the drive. We had just finished unpacking and making sure our lodgings were in working order. I had warned her that things can get rough in the mountains, but to my surprise nothing in the cabin was broken. The pipe seemed to have survived the winter, the lights did not flicker, and we even managed to keep a weak signal with the world outside, courtesy of a router hung up in an apple tree. Not a 20-minute hike from the cabin sat a hillside meadow I discovered on my previous research trip. I had shown her pictures before, but they were nothing compared to the genuine article. Off in the distance stood the snow-tipped Tatra Mountains, and beneath them, like a sapphire pushed into unkept grass, sat a beautiful blue lake. Even though it was a short hike, I grabbed a bag with necessities just in case. The mosquito repellent and water came in handy, but once we settled down in the grass, Veronica noted the absence of one important supply. "It's so nice to get away from the city," she said, stretching out on the green as if it were a king-sized bed. "But you know what I could use right now? A beer." She protested when I got up, said that it was not worth the bother, but to say the truth, I wanted a beer myself. It had been a long drive. When I left her there, Veronica was enveloped in an aura of relaxation. She was ecstatic to have gotten out of the city. She was enjoying her vacation. She was happy. By the time I returned, her calmness had waned. "There's no such thing as flying snakes, right?" she asked, picking at the grass. "I mean, I know that is not a thing. Just want to be sure. Thought a flock flew by a couple minutes ago. Might just be seeing things though." I laughed. Flying snakes were a thing, I told her. Gliding snakes, more accurately. Chrysopelea, more scientifically. They did exist, around Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Surely, she would not see a flock of them in a Slovakian forest. "Do they have wings?" "The snakes I saw had wings," she said. I laughed, again. I told her she was just seeing things. There were no such things as winged snakes. On the very first day she arrived, she saw them. She saw them, and I told her she was only tired from the drive. In the morning, I checked the patchy feed from the trail cams. I was meant to be observing the behavior of the local lynx population, but all of them seemed camera shy. When we went out for a hike in the afternoon, I did not see any trace of them either. In fact, the forest seemed abandoned. No rustling in the bushes. No tracks. No scat. Could not even hear any birds nearby. For the first couple of days, I kept my reports plain and convinced myself the arrival of the truck had the local wildlife hiding. When no signs of life presented in a week, however, I contacted my colleagues from the other research sites. "Plenty of movement on our side," they said. "Enjoy the peace." The sudden, unexplainable dead zone should have given me pause, but it did not. All the hours I saved not having to deal with tracking gave me more time to spend with Veronica. I made an active decision not to question my new influx of leisure time. Occasionally, she had to take a work call with her team back home, but the jittery connection from the apple tree made those occurrences mercifully short. We spent our days together and our nights by the fireplace. Times were good. About 2 weeks into our tranquil stay, I found a dead boar by the lake. He had been dead for a while, but there were still visible bifurcated teeth marks. For a moment I considered a pack of flying vipers pecking the animal to death, but I let that thought go. I knew there were no such things as flying snakes. A couple of days after that I saw a group of squirrels scamper up a tree. That calmed me further. The trail cameras still showed no sign of life, but I did not let it bother me too much. I was simply happy spending time with Veronica. We kept each other distracted and pleased. Until yesterday. There were problems back at work for her, so she wanted to be out of cell phone signal to avoid responsibility. I still had some reports to put together, so Veronica decided to take a walk alone. When she left the cabin, she seemed excited to get some calm time in. By the time she returned, Veronica was terrified. I saw them. They are real. When she rushed into the cabin, she shut all the windows and barred the door. After a brief pace around the room, she even shut the cover of the fireplace. Out on the trail. A flock of flying snakes. At first, I thought she was kidding, but my laughter only deepened her agitation. I tried my best to get her to explain further, but each repetition of the story only made her more panicked. She had seen flying snakes. Twice. They swooped at her this time. They meant her harm. She wanted both of us to get out of the woods immediately. The trail cameras showed her fright as well, but they were vaguer about the source of it. Much like the internet connection hiding in the apple tree, the image was spotty. On the screens I could see Veronica. I could see her wide-open eyes and flailing hands and terror. What she was screaming at, however, was just a blur. Are you sure it wasn't just a bunch of bees or something? The words left my mouth without much though. All my attention was focused on resisting the idea of winged serpents. I did not mean any offense with my suggestion. The fuzzy images on the screen could have, realistically, been a particularly large swarm of bees. I meant no offense with my suggestion, but that did not matter. She became furious. If I wanted to get bit to death by a bunch of flying snakes, that was my imperative. She, however, wanted out. If I were not going to drive her to the nearest airport immediately, she would drive herself. I could take the bus to the city when it was my time to go home. It was getting dark out. I told Veronica I would not risk our lives on the hilly roads. If she still felt that strongly in the morning, I would drive her. There was some resistance, but finally she acquiesced. Veronica spent that entire evening scrolling on her phone, looking for flights. I spent it staring at the blurry shapes on the trail cam, trying to convince myself that there are no such thing as winged snakes. She was all packed by the time I woke up. There was a dirt-cheap flight back home waiting for her in the city. The drive was made in complete silence. Only the static hiss intercut with occasional muffled radio signals kept us company. It was only once we pulled up to the Popradtatri airport that she spoke to me. "Look," she said, meeting my eyes for the first time since the argument. "I know what I saw. Snakes with wings. The only animals in that forest are snakes with wings. You should not be out there alone." There were still free seats on the flight. Some airlines I had never heard of. Infinitely cheaper than the original return trip. The price was almost tempting, but I told Veronica I had to stay the full 3 months of my research commitment. I told Veronica I would be safe up in the cabin. I would be safe in the cabin because I was experienced, well supplied, and there was no such thing as snakes with wings. When I rejected her claims in the car, all the love faded from her eyes. I wanted to keep her company until she had to check in, but the moment we walked into the airport she had to take a work call. She spent our last moments alone in a meeting 1,000 miles away. She warned me repeatedly, and I never believed her. The last thing she told me before she went into the security check was to be careful. I wish I had listened. I got back in the late afternoon and went straight to the trail cameras again. I had intended to look more closely at the blurry shots once more, but when I sat down at the screens, I noticed there was new footage. The cameras had captured another animal in the forest. It was not a winged snake, but it was no less worrying. One of the cameras caught a lynx. At first, I was happy to see a normal animal. I found a semblance of calm in the image. Yet the more I looked at the footage, the more I realized that there was something wrong with the lynx. It was staggering, as if it was drunk. It was bloated. The ballooned-up lynx collapsed near one of the cameras, dead. Without even grabbing my backpack, I set out to check the carcass. The moment I saw the lynx with my own eyes, I knew the creature had met an unnatural fate. The lynx's fur was sparse and the flesh beneath sickly bluish hue. Its eyes were bulging out of its sockets and were covered with a diseased yellow film. The source of the lynx's suffering was clear: teeth marks. The animal was covered in bifurcated teeth marks. The indentations were much deeper than any local animal would suggest, but they were unmistakable. The lynx had been bitten to death by snakes. I was going to examine the carcass further, but a rustling in the trees above quickly wiped those plans away. The sound was faint at first, but with every second I stood in that forest I could hear it louder and louder. Hissing. Something was hissing above me. I ran back to the safety of the cabin as fast as I could. In my sprint through the darkening forest, my mind had changed. The absurdity of Veronica's visions of winged snakes no longer seemed so absurd. She warned me oh so many times, but I did not start to listen until it was too late. When I returned to the cabin, I sent out a flurry of reports. I restated my worry about the forest being void of the usual animal life, and then, scarcely believing my own words, I started to detail the sightings of the winged snakes. By the time I was done sending out my maddening messages, it was dark outside. Usually, I would spend my nights reading a book by the fireplace, yet I could not find within me the calmness to light a fire, let alone read a book. No responses to my messages came, yet that was to be expected. The other researchers had the same tenuous connection to the outside world as I had. I knew I would be lucky to get any response from anyone within the next 3 days. I had tried calling her when I first got into the cabin, but her phone was off. All other attempts to contact her went straight to voicemail. I desperately wanted to speak to her, to hear her voice, to tell her I had made a mistake in not believing the things she had seen with her own eyes, yet when her phone showed no signs of ringing, I decided to send her a voice message. It is while I spoke to her that I first registered the sounds from the fireplace. Thuds. Something was bumping up against the fireplace cover, but I was far too distracted pouring my heart out into my phone. I told Veronica I was wrong to doubt her. I told her about the lynx and the teeth marks, and even about the dead boar I had found just a couple of weeks into our stay. I told her she was right, and, to my own surprise, I found myself promising that I would leave the cabin come morning. Saying that I would retreat to the safety of the city lifted a terrible weight off my chest, but within moments that heaviness returned with renewed strength. The voice message would not send. On closer inspection, I realized the internet had been knocked out. The little green light from the apple tree that assured me that the router was working had been extinguished. Beyond the window, all I could see was darkness. I have never been scared walking through the woods at night. One must be cautious, alert, and prepared, but fear does nothing to help. I have never been scared walking through the woods at night, but when I got out of the cabin to check on the router, I was terrified. I grabbed a flashlight so that I could see and was about to make my way towards the apple tree. Just as I was about to leave, the thudding sounds from the fireplace became more pronounced. I did not check on them. It was starting to dawn on me that something was moving inside of the fireplace, but I wanted to deal with my problems one at a time. It was the thuds from the fireplace that made me grab the hatchet when I left the cabin. That hatchet, I am certain, is the only reason I am not yet a corpse. It all happened so quickly. The moment I aimed the light at the router, I could see that it was wrapped up in a mess of scales. Just as the reality of what I was seeing dawned on me, the scales shifted. Through the night, through sheer darkness, the winged snake leaped in my direction. The sight of the flying reptile shot a wave of adrenaline through my system. With no thought but an animalistic demand for survival, I cut the snake down. Then, with nothing but the horrid drumbeat of my heart bouncing in my skull, I hacked away at the monstrosity with my hatchet. Veronica had been right. What lay at my numb legs was a massive snake covered in wings. The creature's innards shimmered like glitter beneath the force of the flashlight, but I did not observe them for long. I ran. I ran back into the cabin hoping to survive until the morning. It was not until I had shut and barred the door that I realized how futile my fight had been. I might have killed the snake that lurched at me by the apple tree, yet there were many, many more. It was not until I was out of breath and covered in the guts of an unidentifiable freak of nature that I looked at the fireplace. Behind the yellowed charred glass of the fireplace cover, they stared at me. Horrid reptilian eyes. There were dozens of them. Slithering. Ramming their heads against the cover of the fireplace, trying to get in. The few images that have been transmitted onto the cameras before the connection went out paint a terrible picture. These freaks of nature, these winged snakes, they are descending onto the cabin from every corner of the forest. Even now, I can see their eyes shine outside, waiting for an opening to attack. She warned me. She warned me, oh so many times. She warned me and I wish I had listened.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.